Very soon we will begin. Welcome, everyone. I can see that many have been joining us. It's great. Please write your name and where you are joining us from. Great. We are having people from all around the world. Welcome again. And I will leave the scene to Alex now, and she will welcome you all and introduce the series. Yes, Alex.
Thanks very much, Ozan. Welcome, everyone. It's absolutely a delight to have you here from every corner of the world. So welcome to our third event in our Publishing Critical Work series. In this series, we bring you on a monthly basis in conversation with editors of journals that are not only supportive, but also actively welcoming of critical work. And conversely, we bring journal editors in conversation with you, their journal communities. So the idea with the series is to support and nurture critical scholarship and critical community in this time of crisis, and to do so in ways that are nurturing, open, inclusive, and that can reach out across geographical, political, financial, and all sorts of other boundaries. And so we're absolutely delighted to have with us today Mark, Alessia, and Ash, representing Human Relations. This is a journal that barely needs an introduction. It's got an amazing, rich history with its connection to Tavistock Institute, and it also has a very long history of welcoming and publishing critical work. I think probably most people in our virtual space today have at least one or two favorite human relation papers. I know I certainly do, and including some that have actually inspired me into the field. So I'm very much looking forward to the next hour. Before I pass you on into Mark's, Alessia's, and Ash's capable hands, just a couple of housekeeping points. So we do have an hour, and some of it will be taken up by Mark, Alessia, and Ash presenting to us. But then there will be a discussion at the end where you'll have opportunity to ask questions. You can type your questions at any point in time from now on, including when we go into the discussion. We just ask you to please use the Q&A function. Q&A function is the one with little speech bubbles at the bottom of your screen. Not the chat function, but the Q&A function, because it's really helpful to have all the questions in one place, and then we can feed those questions to Mark, Alessia, and Ash to answer at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A function, not the chat function. So this is it from me for now. Without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Mark, who I believe is kicking off. So over to you, Mark. If you just switch your camera off, that's great.
Can you see me? Hear me? I'm taking it that everybody can hear and see me, so it's hard to know whether you can or not at the moment. But thank you very much indeed, everybody, for coming to hear us. Alessia and Ash and I are going to say something about human relations. We're going to do it fairly quickly, I hope, and then give you plenty of time to ask questions about anything to do with the journal you want. I've got a few slides, so let me share the screen. I'm hoping that works. Here's our perspective on publishing critical work in organisational journals, but obviously particularly human relations. So I'll tell you a bit about human relations, or Ash, Alessia and I will tell you a bit about it, something about the review process, but I thought I'd kick off with a sort of general overview of the history of human relations that Alex has already alluded to. Next year, we're going to be 75 years old. First edition of of Human Relations was published in 1947, and we've always had quite an explicitly somewhat critical orientation. I mean, there's always been, one of the things about human relations is that it's a very broad journal. It aspires to be multidisciplinary. It's not just about organization studies. It's about work. Social relations at work is our tagline, really. So that's what I think we're known for. And we do publish a wide range of different kinds of articles. So you can see that we've got, in terms of the disciplinary focus, contributions from across the social sciences. It does tend to be mainly organizational and people from business schools. That's probably the majority of our authors, but for example, our paper of the year last year was awarded to people in a psychology department. So we like to have as broad an approach as possible within the social sciences. But we are grounded. We always have been in what we've always called critical social science in a broad sense. So I think it's broader than critical management studies, but it's all about challenging orthodoxies, all about posing questions which haven't been posed before about work and organization. So in terms of methods, you can see that we have, well, the last time we did a survey, 44% of our papers were quantitative, but still a good number of qualitative, conceptual and mixed methods papers. And you can see from the other side of the slide some of the things that we focus on. Things like leadership, identity have been topics that the journals dealt with right from back in 1947. But I think, Alex mentioned the link with the Tavistock Institute, which has long been associated with psychoanalytical and psychodynamic theories. And there have been landmark papers in a range of work since the 40s that nowadays we may well want to call critical in the CMS sense. Particularly, I've highlighted some thoughts here about organizational democracy, worker resistance, psychodynamic perspectives, and things like that. And of course, in the last 20 or so years, there's been a number of what I've called field-defining papers. Maybe, certainly I remember at the critical moment, the Fourier and Gray paper that introduces what critical management studies is to hopefully a wider audience. I was a PhD student at the time, and when I read it when it first came out in the year 2000, it really animated me. It's definitely one of my favourite papers in the kind of way that Alex mentioned. And I'll show you some of the papers that broadly speaking, in the critical management studies tradition, in the issues from last year. I mean, I won't go through them, but you can see just from the titles that there's a good mix of what you might call, I suppose, traditional kind of labour process critical work, but also feminist and post-colonial and queer theory, and there's a wide range of critical traditions that are represented within the journal. And we have a forthcoming special issue. I mean, it's closed, but freedom, work and organisations in the 21st century, freedom for whom and for whose purpose. So there will be a number of papers in that that are very much coming from a critical tradition. Okay, so that's my introduction. I think I'll hand over to Ash now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. I hope everybody can hear me. All right, so I'll be quick here. This is the editorial team. Mark, who just presented, is the editor-in-chief. As you can see from the list of associate editors, not only do they represent universities across the world, but there are many on here whose name you'll probably recognize as being overtly sympathetic to critical research. So clearly it is a journal that is very welcoming of critical scholarship. Can we go down to the next page? Brilliant. So the types of work that we welcome, in addition to regular manuscripts, there are special issues. Right now, I think the special issue, as Mark indicated, that's currently being, I think the submissions were due late last year, is on freedom. And I believe there's one that's currently, that's open to submissions. In addition to that, there are critical reviews, critical essays, and virtual special issues. Now, for critical essays and critical reviews, I find that these are submissions that are somewhat idiosyncratic to human relations. So they're not for example, when it comes to critical reviews, it's not the same type of reviews you're going to see, for example, in the Journal of Management special issue. So the best way to determine whether it might be a good potential outlet for you would be just to look at previous articles that we've published under that submission stream. Yeah, and if you have ideas for critical essays in particular, or critical reviews, some authors do tend to reach out to Mark and just to have a brief conversation whether their ideas are suitable for that stream. Could we get on to the next slide, please, Mark? There we go. Street creds. All right, so I mean, for the better or for the worse, we are often in institutions that require publications in certain types of journals. When it comes to human relations, the 2-year impact is 3.6. It ranks amongst the social science interdisciplinary category in the top 10%. There we have the management category. More importantly, it is listed on the Financial Times 50 list. It's ranked 4 in the ABS list. Although not noted here, it's also listed as an A-star journal on the, it is listed as an A-star journal on the ABDC list out of Australia. As you can see from other metrics, lots of downloads, lots of engagements in the media and the popular press as well. So what happens when you submit a paper? So very quickly, it gets checked by the editorial office for length, for the fact that it conformed to the guidelines that are prescribed on the submissions site. It is then passed over to, sometimes it's returned to authors at that stage, especially if it's an overly lengthy manuscript. So if you have a look at the guidelines offered by Human Relations, it should be 40 pages or less. Now there is sometimes there's a little bit of give there, but try to be prudent when preparing your manuscripts. It is then passed over to the editor-in-chief, who is of course Mark, at which point he either desk rejects the paper or assigns it to an associate editor. The associate editors, once they review it, at that point it can also be desk rejected or assigned to referees. Then if in the case that it is actually sent out for referees, it gets peer reviewed, gets sent back to the associate editor, who then decides whether to reject or invite the paper for resubmission. Then, of course, there's the back and forth with the authors if it makes it to that point, at which point it can experience multiple rounds of R&R before it is ultimately accepted or rejected. And we'll go on to the next slide. So yeah, I think like a lot of other well-ranked journals, we've received a massive influx of submissions. So last year, I think it was well over 1,100 submissions that the journal received. So in terms of just number, and you can now compare that to sort of the previous year's submission from the bar graph that's provided on the right-hand side. In terms of numbers, typically 1 in 3 manuscripts are rejected by the editor-in-chief at the point that he first receives it. Once it's assigned to the associate editors, now this is the remaining 65% of papers that's left. At that point, 50% of papers are still rejected by the associate editor assigned. Acceptance rates right now is between 6 to 7% after peer review, and if that's, of course, multiple rounds of peer review. Initial review takes weeks, and of course, author revisions often take months. And submission to publication can take between 18 to 24 months. I will also say, just in terms of numbers, as just anecdotal experience from submitting to other journals, it's quite an efficient journal in terms of the number of papers that do get from the date of submission to first decision. The number of submissions that actually get an editorial decision within 90 days is extraordinarily high. So incredibly efficient editorial office that runs the journal. And next slide. I think the next slide, I actually pass it over to Alessia.
Sorry, I'm having trouble changing. You want to change?
No worries.
I'm not quite sure. Maybe if I stop sharing and reshare, maybe that will work.
Sure, and I think I'm actually handing it over to Alessia at this point. So the next slide will be, I think Alessia will be taking over once we get it restarted.
Okay, I'm here, and I will ask Alex and Ozan to start my video, please. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, Alicia, just a moment. We will do that.
Thank you.
You can start talking, Alicia. We'll always just figure out what happened with the video.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for joining us from all over the place. Today, I will continue the conversation that Mark and Ash started, and we are now going to zoom into the issues related to what the authors do, what the reviewers do, and what the associate editors do. When you can see here, the adjective good is not, it's nothing moralistic about it. It's literally just trying to convey the kind of expectations that we have. I hope you can see me now. I don't know. Anyway, the expectation that we have when it comes to the submissions that we get. Oh, hello, everyone. Hi. Fundamentally, the first consideration for the authors who are going to submit their work to human relations is the notion that, let's start with the abstract. The abstract is often considered to be the last thing that we do. But as you know, for those of you who have already gone through the process of getting an acceptance for human relation, there is always at the end, oh, please do consider the importance of the abstract, rewrite it, trying to make it catchy and interesting and so on, also because that's utilized quite a lot to trace the content, right? So it is important to consider the significance of the abstract, and that we try to offer some guidance also in relation to that aspect of the paper. But fundamentally, the gist of it, when it comes to building your own paper for human relation, is the consideration of the 3 C's and 3 P's. The 3 C's being content, context, and contribution, and the 3 P's being position, problem, proposal. In other words, those key issues will have to be considered in your work, and making sure that the contribution of your paper is very clear, and it comes out in an explicit way, and that explicit contribution is also expressed right at the beginning. In other words, this is not a detective story. It's not something that we find out at the end, but it has to be usually part of the way we introduce the story itself, right? At the beginning of the paper, in the introduction, the what, the why, and the how. So those 3 things need to be there. And fundamentally, always just remember to make sure that there is a clear connection with the journal, because a lot of the rejection, as already Mark and Asha started to discuss, actually are also due because there is lack of fit. So human relations, of course, is right from its editorial line, clearly and directly inviting reflection that are critical, that are based and grounded in critical social sciences. And by default, we do not accept a specific type of journal, of articles. So make sure that there is a direct relation with what the journal is trying to do and what the journal publishes, which is, as Mark suggested, is social relationships in and around work as a general kind of labeling of the kind of work that we publish. So content and method need to be appropriate for the journal, making sure that the paper has a clear contribution that is advancing our understanding, usually not, in an incremental sort of way. This is not about producing, sort of predictive type of work. Usually it is about increasing the understanding of a specific set of issues and theories that are about work and the current contemporary issues that we're facing at work, broadly understood, of course, and also a multi-level type of considerations and concerns that we have in organization theory specifically, but as Mark suggested, also in different disciplines beyond the traditional sort of organization theory positioning. Now, can we move on to the other slide, please, Mark, if Mark is still the one doing this? Thank you. So when it comes to the editor, as Ash suggested, so the paper has already gone through a number of checks, right? So the paper is checked to make sure that there is not published somewhere else, or portions are not published somewhere else, and so on. So we are really careful with that. Just as we are careful with our students, we are careful with ourselves, about the kind of work that we're publishing that is not, portion of it already appearing somewhere else, and so on, because everything needs to be cited properly, etc. So all those checks are done at the beginning, and when we receive the paper, all those checks would have been already done by the central office. Fundamentally, the way the editors look at the papers usually is on the same line that I just suggested for the author. Is the content and method appropriate for the journal? So is it within the scope of the journal? And when it comes to the methodology and the kind of line of argument, does it connect and does it directly address what the journal is about? There is a story here that contributes to what the debate is currently addressing. And then specifically, there is this question about the so what, is it, if it is important, so if there is some kind of contribution, why is it important to everyone? So what is there for all of those who read the journal, who are interested in issues in and around work relationships? What is there that adds, if you like, value to that conversation, and therefore it is important for all of us to learn about it. And what we do as editors is we try to find great reviewers and we offer guidance, especially when we get the reviewers' comment back, and we provide a view of where we stand in concert with the reviewers in relation to the paper. So this is fundamentally a very important process that is more, if you like, a conversation. So when it works, and it works well, is a conversation that the associate editor, the authors, and the reviewers have in analyzing and working with the paper. So this is the kind of, if you like, the best possible process that we're trying to get going and to achieve, is to have this profuse conversation with the authors and with the reviewers. Mark, can you please go to the next one? Thank you. So I just want to, first of all, thank all the reviewers here, because I was looking at the names and I can recognize a lot of you who have done reviews for the journal, and some of them I've asked myself. So I thank you very much. It's been a really difficult year for everyone. So having the work and this labor that the reviewers do, which is, of course, completely for free, is voluntary work, is absolutely amazing. And I am just so thankful for everything. And we are at the journal very thankful for all your contribution of, providing great reviews for the journal. And of course, this is important because it literally is the moment where, the value of the journal, the value of the knowledge we produce, and the value of what the contribution itself is established, right? It is that process where this conversation that I was talking about happens. And the reviewers usually, again, go through the various points that, in many ways, one doesn't want to be too formulaic about it, because, of course, as Mark suggested, because we publish so many different types of contribution and different types of research, different type of content also, then, of course, even the way it is written, the articles themselves can have different formats and different, follow, different genre in many ways. But there are specific things that each and one of us, either as an author or as a reviewer or as editor, we are going through, right? And this is always the same. So it's the content and method, is the contribution, what the paper is adding, and the so what question. So is this worth listening? Is this something that all of us are gaining something, learning something that is important to advance our understanding and enrich, if you like, our collective appreciation of specific issues and concerns and so on. In terms of the reviewers' work, one of the things that I would like to, the best, if you like, the best reviewers that I work with are those who are very supportive and developmental in their feedback. All of us have been on the receiving end of horrible reviewers' comments, right? And we do not want to continue with that. We don't want to be those people. We don't want to be that reviewer too. We want to be those people who actually, as I was saying earlier, engage in a proflicus conversation to produce new knowledge. That's the idea. And that does not mean that the authors have to do what we want. They are not supposed to write our paper. They are supposed to write their paper. And with that, in conversation with us, so we can help that process, we can facilitate that process, but we don't want to tell the authors what they are supposed to be doing. So, for example, people can have suggestions, can have different interpretation of the data. They can offer some critical comments, where they can, for example, provide a different interpretation that is evident from the maybe sometimes from the material that is produced in the research. But I've had people who have rewritten, literally, told me how to rewrite something, or and I don't think that's the kind of reviewing process that we're looking for. And another element that I found very, very significant when working with reviewer human relation is the fact that people are very careful with looking at the arguments, the way that the story is told, the way the paper is produced, so that the problematic is clear, that the argument is rigorous, that the argument is very explicit and well supported. So the reviewers who actually don't stay at a very, very general level only, but also get into the, if you like, the details of the paper are very welcome, because this is the moment where we are checking each other's thinking and each other's reasoning, right? And that's an important part of the way manuscripts can progress from a kind of more kind of raw type of production to a production that is actually detailed and rigorous, well thought through, and so on, which is what we aim to achieve, where the contribution really emerges strongly and clearly for the readers. So I think this is it from me. There is the last slide, please, Mark. We are very happy to now answer your questions. There is a last slide with all the information where you can find us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and so on, and I'm sure it will be posted. But if you have any questions, we would be really happy to answer them. There is a lot of, right now, there are a lot of opportunities for critical work to be certainly a protagonist in the journal. So many issues, so many concerns that are at the heart of critical inquiry. So please do submit your work and do work with us. Thank you.
Okay, so we have quite a lot of questions already. So do you want to move on to the discussion now? Shall I leave it in your hands?
Do you want us to work through the questions that in the chat?
Yes, that's right. Just
well, we thought we'd take it. So the first one, I think, is from Tracy. Stylistic adherence appeared on your process slide. Can you talk about that, please? That's pretty, I think that's just things like referencing in the way that the human relations expect, and things like that. So they're relatively small, not too much to worry about. The only thing I would say is that do try to adhere to it. Otherwise, it looks as though you've been targeting another journal and targeting us as an afterthought when you've been rejected from somewhere else, which probably not the look that you want to go for. But it's not really a major issue for most people. But clearly we do require it to be your papers to be properly formatted.
Yeah, I think with Mark, I don't think some journals are super strict about the use of certain, expressions and so on and so forth. And I don't think human relations go to that length. So I think it's more about the format and the way the references and so on. And, as Ash suggested, that the number of pages, that's important because, the work of the reviewers is very valuable, and when we send out papers with 50 pages, that's just difficult for everyone. So if we're really trying to keep the paper to 40 pages, a little bit more sometimes for certain qualitative studies, for example, and but
I think there's a question later on about page length. With the 40 pages, you won't instantly get a reject if it's 41 pages. What we tend to do is try to look at the ratio between the contribution and the length. And there are some papers that do need to be longer. What I think is important, though, is if it is over 40 pages, point out in the cover letter why you think you need more than 40 pages. And as long as you do that, you probably are. I mean, I think I'd be looking very critically at anything over 50, especially if it was just text. I mean, we also have supplementary pages that we can put on a website. So if you've got lots of appendices and things that you want to include, then we can do that, but not in the main paper.
Yeah.
Online. Okay.
Should we move on to, there is a, so I hope, Tracy, that was clear enough. We have a question from Juliana. Is the review process the same for special issues? Yes. So yeah, generally speaking, it is the same. So it goes through all the checks that Ash talked about, and then it gets the editors, the guest editors, would send it out, send the papers, the manuscripts out for review. So to be clear, we do send out the papers to 3 reviewers. So this is our goal all the time. And so we get always 3 reviewers. And sometimes if there are issues, we might have an emergency one, or, we might make decisions ourselves. But the absolute norm is 3 reviewers. And that's the same for the special issues. That goes, however, of course, sometimes there are a lot of papers that might be successful through the review process, and therefore it is a guest editor work, right, to decide what they're, which one of those are addressing specifically what their, eventually their line is. And yeah, so this is, the process is the same. Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything more.
Nothing really, except that we'd expect the same standards in special issues as ordinary issues. So I more or less identical process. You're muted, Ash.
Question 3 comes from Genevieve. When you say initial review takes weeks, does that mean initial decision by the editor and associate editor, or also the peer reviewers? So when it comes to, if your paper is sent out for peer review, human relations target is to get a decision into you by 3 months, within 90 days. Although where most of the papers that are being peer reviewed and having decisions rendered were actually under 3 months currently. It's a pretty efficient process. It takes about a couple of days for Mark to look at it and assign it to an associate editor. It takes an associate editor. I mean, I think I speak for myself, but I think all of the other associate editors also follow a similar process. We actually do read all the papers that are assigned to us first before we decide on sending it out for peer review, just to save reviewers' times as well as the author's time. If the paper has absolutely no chance of getting in its current state, then we would make a decision at that stage. So it's not something that we let the reviewers do the work, and then only once the reviews come back, then we're reviewing then we're looking at the paper. So it takes us a few days once it's assigned to the associate editors to actually read the full paper and decide whether or not to send it out. And as the statistics kind of revealed, about 50% of papers at that stage are just rejected by the associate editors. Again, one of the things, I think Alessia noted this, we tend to provide some sort of explanation as to why we're making the decision in a very constructive manner so that the authors has something to take away with them, even if their paper was not peer reviewed. But going back to the question, in short, it takes roughly 3 months for your paper, if it's sent out for peer review, to be decisioned.
I mean, I've got the statistics at my fingertips here. If we're going to desk reject your paper, at least we do it quickly. On average, we do it in 7 days, and often it's quicker than that. If it's sent out for peer review, 98% of the time we're under 3 months, and the average is just over 2 months if it goes out for review. Okay, David has asked, can you give us some guidance on the expectation in relation to rigor for qualitative data? For example, is it required that more than one person has taken part in coding, analysis, and agreement scores are presented? Do you think we're some kind of American journal? No, sorry, I shouldn't. No, we don't have any of the expectation. I mean, it needs to be consistent with the paradigm, is what I'd say. So if you're doing a piece of qualitative work that is more kind of positivistic, which some qualitative work is, then it may well be appropriate to do that kind of thing. But you know, we certainly don't have any a priori rules that say you have to do this at all. It depends. So you know, if you're doing something that is much more, you know, post-structuralist or something, it would be entirely inconsistent to do that, take that sort of approach. So it all depends.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, and that's why we have you know, a really good selection of associate editors, you know, who really are, if you like, well versed in different types of quantitative and qualitative methods. And maybe it's important to add that we actually have the opportunity also of selecting the papers once Mark send them. So the associate editors can actually select the paper. So there is, you know, it's not like we receive a paper and that's it. We have, even if we don't like it, which, you know, might happen in other situation, but with human relation really it doesn't, because we have the opportunity of selecting the paper out of, you know, how many we've received that week. And therefore, we are always well matched, if you like, with the paper we're working with, right? So both in terms of the kind of methodology. So for example, I wouldn't select a paper that is, you know, quantitative. They use, you know, field, some kind of field experiment and so on, right? Because that's just not the kind of work I tend to do, and therefore I wouldn't want to be involved in that kind of process for that paper. So that really helps also with this notion of rigor that I was talking about. So the rigor is always internal to whatever it is, the methodological choices that the authors have decided, and it has to be in the paper, you know, so whatever that is, the reviewers and the editor and the author will work together to make sure that everything is appropriately and persuasively done.
I think it's probably easier stuff. I take the next one, Dylan. What percentage of papers get rejected because they don't fit the journal? It's about, of the rejections, it's about 20%. That you know the people send in stuff that say just about methods debates, or you know, something that isn't to do with work. So, but other reasons. I mean, there's a whole range of reasons, but in the end, it's you know, because they don't meet the expectations of the journal in various ways. But I don't think we actually quite, you know, we don't sort of tick a box with the classification of why we've rejected it, I suppose. But it's ultimately it's to do with you know, the expectations of high quality, I suppose, ultimately.
Question 6. From Rania, what is the logic behind strict length word count for the journal? Finding this disadvantaging to research in non-Western contexts where explanations of socioeconomic context is important. So the target is 40 pages. We do provide some give again if you're a few pages over. I'll speak very quickly about an experience I had with one paper recently. The paper was, I believe, around 65 pages. And it was a qualitative paper, and it was from a non-Western context. And while the authors acknowledged that it's significantly over the word count, what the authors suggested was, can you have it reviewed, and we'll work with the reviewers if they choose to move it forward about where to shorten it. And I did ultimately reject the paper. And in my rationale, it was I mean, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, these are difficult editorial decisions as to where you're going to cut papers, how you're going to truncate your ideas, how you're going to present your ideas. These are things that the author really decisions the author should be making. We all make this when we prepare our papers. The other problem that Alessia kind of alluded to when she was presenting her section is that it's really onerous on reviewers who are often working at capacity and have multiple other roles in their lives that they're attending to ask them to review an overly lengthy paper. That's a significant investment of their time. So in the interest of reviewers, we really do ask authors to be as concise as possible, so that everybody's time is invested well in the process.
Is it my go?
I think Alessia, we missed Alessia there.
So are we Q7 from Jim? What happens if there is a difference in judgment between reviewers and editors? Yeah, that's a good one when that happens. So, well, what happens is that, frankly, that doesn't happen a lot, I have to say, in my experience, and maybe because, of course, is the selection, the selection element that participates in facilitating a process where there is more or less a kind of understanding that those people will be going in a certain direction in evaluating a paper. But there is that's why in the slides we talked about editorial stir, right? So there is a moment of decision, and we do not necessarily we have to go with what we believe is within the scope, the remit, and the objectives of the journal, within its value and within its criteria. So that does not mean that a reviewer necessarily agrees. Sometimes a reviewer can disagree, but that is where the editorial stir comes in. And sometimes sometimes it's the other way. Sometimes reviewers can be positive and so on, but there are certain issues that another one or two reviewer notice, and as an editor you can really see those issues, and you can work with the authors to try and and resolve those issues and move the paper forward. And if that doesn't happen, you also have to make the decision of, this is not going in the right direction, so it is better to just say no right now, and sometimes that's also the decision that one has to make. So this role is very difficult, and it does require this conversation, to open conversation to happen with the reviewers. If I can give you an example, I had a paper where all the reviewers were, eventually it was like second review, I think, and to me the paper was done, right? And he had few issues, and there was one reviewer who still, that reviewer who still had issues. And I decided I will offer the authors the possibility of answering, yeah, because I just felt it was the completion of a process. And you know, so there was the last moment where the conversation was, you know, made possible. But I wasn't asking for the authors to do what reviewer 3 was saying, you know, because that paper was already at a certain level and we all agreed that it was. And, you know, but that is just to complete the conversation sometimes, you know, to make sure that the authors are given all the chances to see different viewpoints, to improve or move their paper forward.
Just looking at the number of questions, I think we better answer more briefly now, otherwise we're just gonna, we're not gonna make is it Juliana? Yeah. Are you going to take into consideration the challenge of gathering data during the pandemic, more special for qualitative projects? I'm wondering what to say about this. I mean, we deal with papers that have been completed and submitted to us. So funnily enough, I think most of us were expecting submissions in 2020 to be reduced, but the opposite has happened, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence that I've noticed that it's favoured methods, either quants or quals. Surprisingly, the submissions have increased, you know, quite noticeably, about 20% increase in submissions in 2020 compared to 2019. So, but of course, you know, send your papers in when they're ready. So we're sympathetic to the problem, but yeah. Is there anything we should be saying about that?
Should I go to question 9, Mark?
Good idea.
Okay, from Natasha. Hello, I'm a newbie to publishing as a fresh ECR, so please excuse my ignorance. I wanted to gain some clarity on salami publishing. Salami slicing is, well, I think it might be the term. In my case, I have done a thesis which looks at 2 case organizations, which would be acceptable to present. Would it be acceptable to present each case organization separately in 2 articles? Some of the findings have crossover. How often is it that the case that authors could be asked to collect additional? I think I'm on the wrong question now. This is the, there we go. Okay. It was not the goal of my research to compare the organization. Would be something this. Okay, let me just answer this very simply. It's quite a lengthy question, and I'm having difficult scrolling down without messing everything up here. If you're unsure as to whether whether you might be engaging in salami slicing or somehow contravening any of the norms or rules of the journal, it is best just to be very upfront in your cover letter. Just say that I have another working manuscript, or I have another publication based on a similar or the same data set. Here is a copy of the paper, and then let the associate editor or the editor-in-chief adjudicate whether this would be considered salami slicing or something that we might not be interested in or would be interested in. So it's difficult to answer this question with any degree of specificity, given that there are different norms for qualitative research, quantitative research, and so forth. So it's just best to be very, very transparent.
Yeah. Shall I move on to question 10 from Frank? How likely will the EAC refer a reject and submit paper back to the AE who reviewed the paper initially? Yes.
I will do. We've got a policy now that we always do that.
Yes, exactly. We find that that's the best way forward. And please do not submit paper that were reject, because we've had that too. If it is a reject and resubmit because the paper has a lot of potential and so on, for example, the data were really interesting and so on, sometimes the papers are invited to be resubmitted after a deep,
we better move on, Alessia, otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
From a partner.
Yeah. Is it me?
Yeah.
please, can you provide some insight on whether we can sign up as review? Oh yeah, absolutely. Please drop a line to the editorial office, Human Relations at Tavistock Institute. I mean, it's on the website, the email address to use. We're always looking for reviewers. You know, if you volunteer, expect to get asked. But we like to know things like your key, your key interests and all that kind of thing.
Question 12 from Frank. And how many papers can authors submit at a time? I don't think there's a limit. So however many high quality papers you can be working on at capacity is going to be fine. So there's certainly no limit.
Yeah, absolutely. Q13 from Jane, may I inquire about your approach to publishing from a PhD thesis, please? What are the common pitfalls to avoid, please? Well, I mean, I suppose the key point is, do remember that this is a journal article and therefore is literally a completely different genre of writing, right? So that's the point, especially if you know, the PhD thesis was a monograph-based PhD, then, it literally is a completely different way of writing. Journal articles usually have one or two ideas, and that's what an article is. If there is more than that, it's probably already trying to do too much, and therefore it's probably going to be rejected. So I think that's the issue. Of course, some people now are publishing the PhD with three, finishing the PhD with three papers. So, that might be easier, but do remember that you are addressing the scope and the format and the aims of the journal. So, that has to be absolutely key in the re-elaboration of the paper from your PhD into the formats and the ideas and the aims and the kind of concerns of human relations. But absolutely, yes, we do welcome very much.
We better move on. Sophie, hello. I know every case is different, but a rough approximation of the number of interviews. Again, it's all paradigm dependent. It's a bit like the earlier question that was similar. It all depends, but I mean, we've published studies based on interviews with just tiny numbers, 1 or 2 people, or in some cases hundreds. It all depends on what your aims and objectives and your epistemology and so on. We don't have rules, and in fact, I'm just looking at, is it Safer Adams' question? It's a similar question. No, we really don't have requirements, explicit or implicit, about things like generalizability. Again, it all depends on, we're open to all sorts of different paradigms. Okay, so don't think of us as having kind of positivistic assumptions somewhere down the line. I genuinely think we don't have those. Okay, sorry.
So Mark, I think you answered Adam's question as well there. So I'm going to go on to Q16 from Scott. Are significant number of human relations references required for fit? Is this checked? And if so, what is the rule of thumb? There is absolutely not, we're not looking for a particular number. I will slightly broaden this question and say there should be, I mean, and this is not something that is idiosyncratic or specific to human relations, but any journal you're going to submit to, you should have a reason why you're submitting to that journal. And one of the important reasons often is you want to add to the ongoing conversations and debates in that journal. So if you're not engaging at all organically with human relations publications and so forth, just ask yourself, is this really the right outlet for my work? And sometimes you'll actually have just coincidentally have no human relations submission, but it absolutely fits the scope of the journal, which by all means submit it. So there's no hard requirement. It isn't something that we like explicitly check unless we have reason to, for whatever reason. So I'll move on and hand it over to Alessia for Q17.
Yes, from Manuel. Is it possible to suggest in the cover letter to work with a particular associate editor because we believe his work fits better with our paper? The answer is yes, people do, authors do that. And they also are very kind in telling us who they've already sent the paper to for reviewers, so that we avoid, sending it to their pals. So usually, as I said, it's a nice conversation. We are very open to the author suggestions, and so yeah, that might happen, but please do say.
I've got a feeling that we're about to be cut off, so shall I try and do really quick answers to the rest?
Mark,
welcome, yes. Are there any methodological preferences at the moment? No, these are quite easy questions. Is it acceptable to add additional authors throughout the review process? It does happen. It is acceptable. I mean, it's unusual, but it can happen. Penelope, this is not a question. Right. I'll read it out. Thank you so much for the insights panel, noting editor Contu's comment. I would like to say I feel inspired to see human relations publishing more work by African and Black scholars. Thank you for recognizing. I would also like to thank reviewers who accept it. Okay, people can read that comment for themselves, but thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. I think as an editorial team, we're very keen to extend our authors into every part of the world, and at the moment there are places. The African continent, for example, is one where we get very few submissions from universities in Africa, and if there are ways of extending that, then we'd be really keen to welcome that. I mean, we have got an author who is not an author, another associate editor who's Nigerian. He grew up in Nigeria, so and we've got a good race mix of ethnicities on the editorial team. So it's nice to see that we're being acknowledged on that. And then I think
Mark, just to say, sorry, you won't be cut off. So if you're happy
I was panicking
for a few more minutes, then if you're welcome to stay for a few more minutes, then to answer more questions, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry.
Well, shall I answer the last one? We go back and maybe more questions. I have a rich data set that I gathered for the PhD. I have 3 papers, and is it okay if I use the large data set for more papers? I think we're careful about people. Well, it goes back to the salami slicing question, perhaps. But if you're saying different things from the same data set, then that's usually okay. So if we've got a bit more time, then maybe Ash and Alessia can come in and help me out with some of these.
Yeah, where are we?
I'm looking right at the last question at the moment. Anonymous attendee.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've answered all the questions, haven't we?
I think so. Yeah. I'm just.
So I mean, I think unless there are any others, I just we're definitely trying to be in conversation with authors and issues and concerns from different parts of the world and different issues, and I think that is the pleasure of human relations. Is the pluralism basically that drives the journal and has been driving the journal from its inception. And I think also the connection with practice, but without having this kind of instrumental logic that drives it, right? So I think is the pleasure, if you like, of working with human relations. And certainly for me, it has been a pleasure being an author who's published in the journal, and then now being an associate editor. I'm actually really proud of this, because to me Mark, for me human relation is I don't know, there is a legacy to it that I remember learning about when I was a psychology student.
I completely agree. I mean, that's why what I love about the journal is that it engages with a lot of people. So one of the things, because it's so interdisciplinary, you have a potential to talk to people who are outside your paradigm and things like that. And I mean, we get something like 850,000 downloads of papers a year, which, even compared to some of the American journals, that's a lot. That in comparison. So it's if you're published in Human Relations, the chances are lots of people will see your paper, you know, and that's really good news for critical scholarship and for others. That's the hard sell though.
There is a question 23 from Sophie. How often is it the case that authors could be asked to collect additional qualitative data through the review process? I mean, it's never happened to me. I don't know if Mark has experience of that. I think sometimes it's about, I mean, a lot of the time in my experience is about the fact that the analysis is not there, you know, so is that either the design is problematic, and if the design is problematic, then it would be a reject, you know, because, you know, if the design is problematic, there is not much you can do. But if there is an issue with the analysis, that's often something that in the reviewing process, you know, authors can be asked to, you know, to revise, to explain, to clarify, to redo, and so on. But I personally have never had reviewers asking for more data on that. But
I can't imagine it happening in human relations. Again, it suggests a kind of positivistic paradigm to me, that sort of thing. So certainly the kind of papers that I would imagine most of the audience are interested in submitting, it just wouldn't happen.
okay, I think we've answered all the questions, I hope.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And thank you for staying on for a bit longer to cope with them, to address all these interesting, important questions.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. So thank you again, Alessia and Mark and Ash. This was absolutely fantastic and informative. I think my quote of the day is from Mark, "Do you think we're some kind of American journal?" I don't think I'll forget that in a hurry. So
sorry about that. I should apologize for that.
Oh, no.
I love all American journals.
I am in the US, by the way.
We've got two people from North America there.
But we all know what especially Academy of Management journals can be like. So it's like important to differentiate human relations in terms of tradition and outlook. So thank you very much. It was really, really brilliant. Just before we close, just wanted to draw your attention to forthcoming events. So we've got 2 events coming up that you already can register for. The first one is on 23rd of March. It's about the business of immigration and migration, which is looking absolutely amazing. And then on 20th of April, we have our next publishing critical work event, the 4th one, and that will be with management learning. So do sign up for both of those. Just a reminder that you can follow us on YouTube, and all videos of all past events are available there, including this one, which will be available shortly. And if you had to leave early, you'll be able to see the end of it as part of the recording. Do follow us on Twitter and on Eventbrite for news and announcements. And if you've been inspired to organize your own CMS InTouch event, then do drop us a line at cmswebinars@gmail.com, and we'll be very, very happy to hear your ideas. So thanks again. Thanks also to my InTouch colleagues who are behind the scenes, Ozan, Kat, Arturo, and Vijeta. Lots of work going on there to make all this happen. And thanks again to Mark and Ash and Alessia. So it's been absolutely great. And to all of you, take care, keep safe, stay well, and hope to see you again very soon indeed.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.